Great to be here in Box Hill with our candidate Karina Garland, our candidate for Chisholm, with the Victorian Premier, my friend Daniel Andrews, with Jacinta Allen, who I worked with closely when we were both ministers together, helping on nation-building projects, and with my team, including Catherine King, our Shadow Infrastructure Minister, the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, and Penny Wong. And I'm particularly pleased to be making a major infrastructure announcement, because nation-building infrastructure can change the country. It builds productivity, it builds efficiency, it grows the economy, and it also improves, of course, with road safety. If you're putting people on the trains, they're safer. And this project, the Suburban Rail Loop, is an exciting project. I can't think of a more exciting infrastructure project in the entire nation. And that's why federal Labor will contribute an initial contribution of $2.2 billion to this project. This project will transform the way that Melbournians can get around this city, but also transform for the whole of Victoria, because it will do what great cities do. If you think about the great cities of the world, London, Paris, New York, you don't have to go into the centre to get around those cities. What the Suburban Rail Loop does is improve the efficiency of the entire rail network. And together with Melbourne Metro, which is about increasing the capacity of the network, our three central cities, Sydney on the east coast, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, all suffered from congestion at the centre. The solutions to them were Melbourne Metro, the Metro project that is happening in Sydney to increase capacity and break the congestion on the City Circle line, and of course in Brisbane, Cross River Rail. We agreed to fund, and indeed we had Commonwealth representation on the board of Melbourne Metro before the election of the Abbott government. But the Abbott government ripped $3 billion out of Melbourne Metro, and they've been ripping Victorian taxpayers off ever since. Ever since, Victoria has not got its fair share of infrastructure funding. This project will create thousands of jobs, will improve efficiency, is nation building, and will make an enormous difference. And that's why federal Labor is backing this project, which has, by the way, a benefit cost ratio of 1.7. And that stands in stark contrast, our commitment, to the current federal government's approach with its colour-coded spreadsheets. We were in Kooyong earlier today at a level crossing. Now, in Kooyong, at Surrey Hills, was one of the 4 commuter car parks that were promised in Josh Frydenberg's electorate at the last election, but were cancelled at a cost of some $65 million. I don't know where they're going to put the car park at Surrey Hills, I've got to say, but at least there is a train station there, because in some of the projects that were announced, there's not a train station for a commuter car park. It makes no sense. But it stands in stark contrast. Labor will always support nation-building projects. That's why we funded regional rail link. That's why we did the M80, the Managed Motorways program, when we were last in government. We want Infrastructure Australia to be revitalised, for us to move back to productivity-boosting infrastructure, and I'm very pleased to be here with the Premier today.
Well, thanks very much, Albo. This is a fantastic announcement for every Victorian who wants more jobs, a better road network, a better public transport system. The Suburban Rail Loop is the biggest project of its kind anywhere in our state, indeed perhaps the biggest public transport project in our nation's history. It's a project that's been started by our government, and I do genuinely hope for a partnership with an Albanese federal Labor government, because when you work together in a partnership, that's how you get things done, not conflict, but working together in a partnership to create jobs, to get people where they want to go, to health appointments, to education and training, to friends and family, to retail, to housing. That's what the Suburban Rail Loop is all about. At the moment, we've got all the spokes, but we don't have the wheel to connect all those different train lines. In fact, we have so many people every morning, they're going all the way into town on one line, only to then turn around and go back where they want to go on a different train line. That doesn't work. And as we look to Melbourne in the decades to come, as big as London is today, 2056, You're talking about Melbourne at 9 million people. We need to invest in things like the Suburban Rail Loop. I'm so pleased and so grateful that this project has been a priority for Anthony, for federal Labor, and with this $2.2 billion partnership, then we will get this done. We've already got very significant funding down. Early works will begin at the end of this year. This first stage between Cheltenham and Box Hill is 8,000 jobs alone, 8,000 livelihoods, 8,000 families with the security and certainty that they are building a better future for our state and for our nation. Albo, thank you very, very much.
Thanks very much, Premier, and to Anthony as well. This is a transformational project for the state of Victoria. For people who live in the outer metropolitan areas, being able to travel to work, to appointments, that $2.2 billion we're committing to Suburban Rail, the east component from Box Hill to Cheltenham, really will be transformational. But it's transformational for regional people as well. If you live in Ballarat or Bendigo, as Jacinta and I do, to actually get to the southeastern suburbs, you of course have to come into the centre of town to do that. And if you want to get out to the southeast, you then have to change trains. This will transform the way in which country people access Melbourne as well. But equally what it will do is bring new centres, new opportunities for new jobs into our suburbs. It really is transformational, and I absolutely commend the Premier for bringing this project to us. This is the difference. Federal Labor wants to work in collaboration with the states. We don't want to pick fights. We don't want to see under delivery, as we've seen with commuter car parks. We actually want to get on with the job of delivering, and that's what we'll do with Suburban Rail.
Thanks very much. Catherine, Majura? I don't believe it is an appropriate comment. And I'll make this point. Vulnerable people, in particular, are deserving of respect. Every human being deserves respect. What we need to look for from our national political leaders as ways to unify the country and bring people together, not play politics in order to divide people.
The Australian Chamber of Commerce.
And then, yeah.
The Australian Chamber of Commerce says that a push to increase wages in an unsustainable way could leave tens of thousands of businesses on the brink. You said earlier today that you do not support a push from unions to increase wages.
Well, that's not what I said.
And, well, you did say that you do not support the minimum wage to increase to 5.5%.
No, it's not what I said, but go ahead.
How much exactly will wages increase under an Albanese government?
What I said this morning was that no one should go backwards. The ACTU make their claim independently. We're not the ACTU. What I said this morning, though, was that when the Fair Work Commission considers any minimum pay increase, people should not go backwards. If you're on the minimum wage, you're struggling to pay your rent, you're struggling to buy food, you're struggling to get by. And the Fair Work Commission should bear that in mind in the decision that they make. The difference at this election campaign is very stark and very clear. We have a government that have low wage growth as a key feature of their economic architecture. They've said that, and that is what they have done over 10 years. Labor has a plan. Labor has a plan to lift wages, and that is what we will do. A stark difference between the two. Suburban Rail Loop, I hear the magic words about the project.
I do have two questions, Gerald.
Hey, well, you get one.
Okay, on Suburban Rail Loop, you've obviously contributed $2.2 billion. This has been slated by the Victorian government as a project that could cost up to $50 billion. If elected, would you increase that commitment? Because the state has been asking the federal government for much more money in the past, even up to $10 billion.
We're making our commitment today because that's what we are putting forward to Victoria. We, of course, will work. This is a project that will go for a long period of time. We're hoping to begin very soon in the next 12 months for early works. But this is a nation-building project. Our initial commitment is what we're making today, which is $2.2 billion. What that will do is should give the Victorian government confidence that they'll have a partner with the national government.
You're focused on real wages growth. Why would you support a push to ensure that the minimum wage outruns inflation?
I believe the minimum wage should at least keep up with the cost of living. I was asked this morning about the ACTU claim. The ACTU claim is the ACTU's. Labor will put forward, in government we would put forward a separate submission based upon Labor's claim. But we think no one should go, backwards. People should be at least keeping up with the cost of living. Sure? Not at all. Our project, let's be clear about what the announcement was yesterday. We put out the costs that we gave, the full costs yesterday were some $146.5 million. That's the cost over the forward estimates of the entire program. Right? That was the cost over the entire program of the announcements that we made yesterday. The forward estimates costs are completely accurate. This is 2- and 4-year degrees. We've said 1,000 places a year. Not all of those are within the forward estimates.
Grafton and others say that the rise in wholesale power price will flow to consumers, push up power bills. Should coal stay in the system longer to mitigate that? And briefly, are you concerned about taking larger deficits than the government to the election before?
Well, we'll of course put all of our costings out before the election. I assume the government will too. Now, people have started voting in this election. They started yesterday. And I note that record numbers of people, the anecdotal evidence, we don't have the precise figures, but the reports from polling booths right around the country is that record people are voting early. And record people are also putting in postal votes. So there's some 2 million people have applied for postal votes. That will be a record number. We encourage people to vote in our democracy. In our democracy. The coalition have not yet had their campaign launch. I assume at a campaign launch you have some policy announcements. So all of the sort of adding up of where both sides are can't occur. The idea that you can do that before the coalition had its campaign launch is in my view, completely untenable. Hang on one tick. Well, this project does stack up because it's got a BCR 1.7. I tell you what doesn't stack up. Commuter car parks that were announced at the last election, yes, it stacks up. It has a BCR, a benefit cost ratio of 1.7. 1.7. And we'll make this point as well. The other thing that we have said, you've asked your question, you get to ask the question, then I get to answer it. That's how these work. Infrastructure Australia, that model has been undermined. When I was the Infrastructure Minister, we had Sir Rod Eddington as the Chair of Infrastructure Australia. He now is the Chair of Infrastructure Partnerships Australia, the major private sector body. All of the big players in infrastructure in this country regard him as significant enough to be the Chair of that body. Sir Rod Eddington is someone who was knighted for saving British Airways, is someone who is on, or has been on, the News Corp International Board, Rio Tinto, a senior business person. We had Mark Birrell, the Minister under the Kennett government for major projects, as the Deputy Chair of that board. We had Heather Ridout, we had Kerry Schott, we had Ken Henry. We had serious work being done. Now, Infrastructure Australia is now chaired by, he might be a good bloke, but he was the mayor of one of Barnaby Joyce's local councils, who has said that he's going to travel around Australia in a caravan. Fair enough, he's retired, and ring in to the Infrastructure Australia board. This is a board and a process that we took seriously. This is a process that's been undermined by a government that hasn't taken it seriously.
saying you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
And secondly,
No, you've got that's it. Absolutely.
Can I just ask you on Indigenous health? An economic order commissioned by Nacho has found there's a $4.4 billion funding gap for Indigenous health. Given the higher burden that First Nations people are facing, what will an elected Labor government do to address this? Can you commit any funding to help close that gap?
Well, we have already, and Penny Wong, in my 1 week absence, went to Alice Springs to make the major announcement that I was going to make, which was for 500 additional First Nations health workers, including for areas like dialysis and life-saving projects. We've also made a number of announcements through Linda Burney in areas like Western New South Wales, in Ceduna, in South Australia. We do need to close the gap when it comes to Indigenous health. This is a very serious issue. You might want to.
At the moment, they're saying that people are not able to fill job vacancies there because they can't find housing, rental vacancies are as low as 1%. What specifically is Labor doing to help regional housing?
Look, it's a major issue because one of the things that happened during the pandemic was that more people discovered they could work from home and could move to regions. And one of the things that used to be more attractive about regions was that housing costs were lower. But we've seen some of the highest increases in housing being in places like Launceston in Tasmania. It is something that we need to address. We have announced a range of housing policies, including our Housing Australia Future Fund, including support. Regions will be a part of that program, as well as the Help to Buy program, which, as you'd be aware, I think you were with us on the Central Coast with the young woman who saw that that program would help her potentially and her partner to have access to housing. A program, I might add, that's working very effectively here in Victoria. Yeah.
You're meeting with businesses after the election to talk about wages. What will you do specifically for those industries like childcare and aged care and also wages?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good one. I note that the women business leaders have made a significant statement over today that's covered in the newspapers. And that is one of the reasons why we have said that gender pay should be made equity should be made an objective of the Fair Work Act, because there have been 21 separate cases taken to the Fair Work Act over going back more than a decade, of which only one has been successful. And if you look at the structural difference, the gender pay gap in Australia is 13.8%. Now, that represents a structural weakness in our industrial relations system, whereby because only one of, I think it's 21 cases from memory have been taken. The only one that was successful was in 2012 when Julia Gillard was the Prime Minister in the Social and Community Services Award. What that did was grant a significant pay increase for workers in that sector. The evidence, when you go back and look at the consequences of that decision, are that a largely feminised industry of community workers have stayed in the industry, have therefore been more productive, have therefore been able to go up the career chain and earn higher wages, and therefore earn more superannuation and better retirement incomes. But when you have 21 separate cases being taken and only one being successful, then there's a structural problem there. And specifically as well, the aged care case that's before the Fair Work Commission at the moment. Aged care workers are paid $22 an hour. This is tough work. It's demanding physically, but it's also are demanding emotionally in terms of their mental health. We have said we will make a submission saying that the Fair Work Commission should bear in mind the evidence that's before, the evidence that was before the Royal Commission into aged care, that recognised that there was a crisis, recognised that unless we do something, then people will continue to leave the sector. Sure. Yeah. Good. Thank you, Trudy.
Well, the record is very clear. Scott Morrison, every federal dollar that Victorians get from the miserable Morrison government, we ought to bow our head and treat it like it's foreign aid. We have been ripped off by this Liberal national government, and instead of Mr Morrison talking about these issues, he ought to have been here delivering for Victorian workers and families. I've had a conversation with the Prime Minister about Suburban Rail Loop, and $0. $0. The contrast could not be clearer. Anthony Albanese is about building things, he's about partnership, he's about creating jobs, he's about making sure that our cities and regions, our nation, actually works. Well, that is a ridiculous suggestion that would only be made by a bloke who is so desperate because he's been there for a decade and done precisely nothing. Done precisely nothing. This project stacks up. This project more than stacks up. It's not a cost, it's an investment in jobs and a road and rail network that actually takes people where they want to go. And $2.2 billion is a very significant commitment. We would always like more, but $2.2 billion versus zero from Scott Morrison. You know, this is what desperate people who have built nothing and done nothing, got an excuse for everything and a plan for nothing. This is the sort of stuff that comes out of Prime Ministers who have just run out of time. Well, this is the thing about the Federal Liberal Party. They say lots of things and they do very little. They do very little. If only their talk mattered. If only the pure politics of these people mattered. Let me be really clear with you, Clay. When Victorians were at their darkest time, senior federal Liberals proved to be Liberals first and Victorians second. They thought they were bagging our government. They were bagging every Victorian who was following the rules and doing the right thing. And that might be one of the reasons why they're in a bit of trouble in their seats. At the end of the day, this is Albo's press conference, and back to him. Don't get me started.
Thanks, Premier. Can I just make this point about going to Trudy's question? I want to make 2 points. One is that I want to work with all premiers constructively. That's what I did when I was in government last time, including the New South Wales coalition government that I sat down with and negotiated, for example, $405 million from each level of government to do what's now called North Connects, was then called the F3 to M2. I sat down with the Victorian Liberal government. We negotiated with the Liberal government $3 billion for the Melbourne Metro project, not with the Labor government, with the Liberal government, and then it was delayed, and the reason why it's not all done a long time ago was because that was cut. I prioritised funding not based upon an electoral map, based upon need. We had $7.6 billion to the Pacific Highway that ran through coalition seats by and large, compared with the Howard government's $1.3 billion. We had a similar figure, over $7 billion for the Bruce Highway, compared with the Howard government's $1.3 billion. We funded projects like Gold Coast Light Rail that went nowhere near any Labor electorates, I assure you, but was a priority project approved by Infrastructure Australia. We approved all of the projects that went through the Infrastructure Australia process. That's the difference between me and Mr Morrison. Nation-building projects that make a difference on infrastructure compared with compared with a coalition that just get out the colour-coded maps that say that this is not a national priority for the national government, but a commuter car park is, that they announce and then cancel. And an example as well, I make this second point, is that I also want to work with Dominic Perrottet and the Tasmanian new Liberal Premier in Tasmania, and anyone who's a state leader. And today there's an announcement in Epping, one that I will support as well. I know the New South Wales Liberal government promised this 4 years ago and nothing's happened, but we will match certainly that commitment that is forward. Just a couple more.
Mr. Albanese, you're
I think that politicians shouldn't comment about IBAC and processes which are taking place.
You are proposing a federal act.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about a National Anti-Corruption Commission.
Talking about what you're proposing and what you're promising at a federal level, is it acceptable? Would it be acceptable for that federal body to examine politicians in secret behind closed doors?
It will be acceptable for that body to operate according to how it sees it should operate and not take directives from politicians about how it operates. Yep, last one.
You've spoken a lot about your record as infrastructure minister.
Yeah.
Infrastructure Australia to take the politics out of funding to projects that stack up. Why then did you promise $10 billion as the shadow infrastructure minister for Suburban Rail Loop at the last election? There was no business case to get concrete to Infrastructure Australia. That would have been the biggest investment ever by a federal government in a transport project, and there was no evidence about that it stacked up.
This is a game-changing project. This is a game-changing project. When you look at the way that cities operate around the world, you look at any of them, and what you need to avoid, and something that we did, this is a natural extension of the work that was done. You couldn't do this before you did the Metro project, because you need to fix the hub, and then you need the spokes to be connected. That is what you need to do. That is what the projects, for example, extending the Queensland line in Springfield do. That's what Regional Rail Link did here in Victoria. What you need to do is to make sure, and I make this point as well, and this is the last one that I'll make, because it's a good one. Because it's a good one. Because it's a good one. Because if you get advice from any transport economist and you look at the way that cities work, Infrastructure Australia and the Major Cities Unit, that I established, that this government abolished the Major Cities Unit. One of the works that they did was that you need to prioritise urban public transport, and you need to fix the way that they operate, and you need to stop the circumstance whereby, whether you're in Box Hill and want to go to Western Melbourne and you've got to go right through the city, or whether you're from Ballarat and Bendigo and you've got to go into the city in order to get to the southeast, you fix that problem. This is the same issue that our major cities are confronting. And a city like Melbourne, a great global city of growing to 8 or 9 million over coming years. You see the growth that is there. We did I had the great honour of opening projects like Tarneit, new rail station with Regional Rail Link. You know what we did when we were in government? We promised projects, we provided the funding, and we opened them during that period in government. During that period in government, I'll wait for the nation-building projects that have been covered by this government. Crickets. That is the question. That is the answer. That these nation-building projects should be where the Commonwealth Government prioritises. We did, when I was the Minister for Infrastructure, we funded more Commonwealth Fund investment went into urban public transport than all previous governments combined for 107 years. 6 years, versus 107. Why did we do that? Because urban public transport has to be an absolute priority. Our cities, we are the most urbanised country on the planet. Our cities need urban public transport. We'll work with state governments to get that done. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Authorised by P. Erickson, ALP, Canberra.